Hi, everybody. So welcome to the first video of week 3. We're talking about aging this week and cultural ageism, as well as some issues around generation gaps a little later in the week. But basically, this week is meant to be sort of those cultural issues around aging, how we as society see aging, treat aging, and some of the key factors in there. So, of course, we're going to talk about ageism, which is a major thrust in aging issues and the root of a lot of, I would say, the problems related to aging today. So the first thing that I want to ask is your thoughts. Do you think we're anti-aging as a nation? Anyway, let's pick the United States. And if you do think so, if you're nodding your head yes or no or thinking it, why? If so, what evidence do you see that we are an ageist society? What types of things can you see, feel, touch, hear that are products of ageism? So I'm trying to think about a few of those things and what types of examples you can think of. And if you don't think we're an ageist society, on the contrary, think of examples of more positive approaches to aging that you've seen that make you think, well, maybe we're not as bad as we're made out to be. Another question that I have about ageism, it's sort of one of the last bastions of prejudice that we've allowed ourselves to have. So we don't really tolerate anti-women, anti-Black, anti-gay sentiments in the media or in general in the majority public, right? We can think about all those isms that we have. If someone tweets out something that has anti-Black or anti-women or anti-gay sentiments, they're probably going to get burned pretty bad. But if someone tweets out something that's anti-aging or ageist, people are probably just going to laugh and they're probably going to get a lot of retweets. So people don't really get fired for expressing ageist sentiments. They don't get in trouble. More so they get lauded, laughed with, and oh yes, kind of knowing nods from people. So that's one thing that I want you to think of is we don't really have the same sort of view of ageism as we do of other isms. We haven't quite attacked it yet. It's seen it as offensive in society. And we really haven't had an anti-ageist revolution either. So when you think about all those other isms as well, all those other prejudices that we carry, they have been followed in history by usually some kind of revolution and change, right? Like the women's movement and getting the right to vote, or burning bras and getting, putting the women's movement in context in the 60s, or Stonewall and the anti-gay movement and that revolution and the subsequent revolutionary acts towards gay rights. And certainly desegregation of schools when we think about racism, things like that. So for ageism, we really haven't had that revolution, where we've decided that it's a horrible thing and we can't abide that, and that's not equal treatment or fairness. And then secondly, we don't really have any revolutionary figures or events that we can point to that say, that's when ageism became not okay and when we really just started to turn the corner. So we're hoping that within our lifetime that happens, right, for us. Now, this is an ad that was actually in a San Diego magazine, and this is from the Yo's Assist Ageist blog, and I think it's just horrific that they would do this. To even say, call a woman an old bag is pretty horrible, but making that connection between that it's for marketing purposes, right? But, right, not uncommon. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what cultural ageism is, how it can impact us at different levels of ageism. We'll talk about different types and different levels, and some of the effects that it can have on older adults and what the research says about that. And then just a little bit about what can be done. Okay, so first of all, what is ageism? So this term was actually coined by Richard Butler in 1969 when he was reacting to an article about unfair housing in the Washington Post. Ageism can be seen as a systematic stereotyping of, so prejudice, stereotype and prejudice, attitudes and thoughts about older adults, and discrimination against or behaviors against people because they are old, like racism and sexism accomplish this with skin and gender, right? So we see that now ageism in this era becomes a term. So it's generally defined as either negative or positive stereotypes about older adults, including, right, so prejudice against, that attitude against a group of older adults, and or discrimination against, behaviors against older adults, based on just their chronological age or the perception of them as being elderly. There are a lot of different descriptors of ageism. We're going to talk about a few different types and some different levels at a macro and micro level, but that's the basic idea. So it's both emotions and attitudes and thoughts. Thoughts are the stereotypes. Prejudice is the attitudes, and discrimination is the behaviors. Okay. So there is an article that was put out recently, done by the American Society on Aging, where they employed this company to look at what are the beliefs about aging in our society. What does the general public say, and what do experts say? And this is just a breakdown, basically, of what that is. And they found in the data, they analyzed it qualitatively, and they found 3 different areas in which people were talking about aging. And one, and this is broken down by the public and the general public view, and experts, so people in aging, either clinical experts like doctors, PhDs, or people who work in aging, and then the just general public. So one thing was about capabilities, and a lot of people in the public see aging as losing control or breaking down, and how that's inevitable. So there's a focus on how increased healthcare needs are going to happen, and they're going to be unable to meet those needs, and it's essentially a doom and gloom. Nothing can be done. Whereas in the expert view, that's not it at all. They understand that there is a broad spectrum of older adults, and not everyone is, inevitably going to decline to the point of not being able to function, and there are resources and adaptability in aging. As far as role in society, general public view is that older adults are this other compartmentalized group, right? So it's these people that aren't me, right? And that's what we do when we have prejudicial attitudes, is we other, right? It's them over there, not us, right? They often saw older adults as burdening society, as not having a significant role, and that they were this other compartmentalized group, as opposed to experts who were like, no, we're all a part of this society, and there are several contributions that older adults make economically, socially, etc., and we're all aging. The other topic area that people mention is culpability. So who's responsible? And we're really interested in that in the US, right? It's all about personal responsibility and pulling yourselves up from your bootstraps. And a lot of times the general public view is that this bad situation of aging is the fault of the older adult. This bad situation, whether it's, a drain on our resources, or not enough money, or not enough health care, is the fault of a huge older adult population. Whereas experts take a more ecological approach, which means they understand that context and social norms and issues that are bigger societally than just getting older are responsible really for a lot of the problems that we're seeing. So these misperceptions of aging, are fueled a lot by our stereotypes of older adults, right? So that's a big part of ageism, is our stereotypical beliefs about older adults. And that leads us to these prejudicial attitudes, and for some, discriminatory behaviors. All right, I want to talk about attitudes a little bit. So, in implicit and explicit ageism are as one way to talk about ageism in two types. So, if I asked you to raise your hand if you're ageist, would you? What about if you believe that being older is equal to decline? Are older adults a burden to society? So now, are you more likely or not, especially if we were all together in a group, to just openly raise your hand and say, yes, I believe those things? But that's what explicit ageism is. It's a conscious awareness, intentional or control of your thoughts, feelings, and actions about a person or a group of people, right? So in this way, it's the older adult. So it's overt. You are you are aware of it, you're conscious of it, and you're intending to be prejudiced against older adults, right? So here's a graphic here about, senior center, don't forget, senior center, remember to turn. So these are very explicit out there in front of your face. Aging is funny, bad, whatever, negative. And now on the opposite end is implicit ageism. So these are thoughts, feelings, and actions that we have towards older adults that exist or operate under our own conscious awareness. They're in some ways subconscious. They're a part of society. They just exist, and we don't really recognize them. We don't know that they're there. And here's some interesting examples of implicit ageism, right? You see them all the time when we see ads about anti-wrinkle creams and looking young and beautiful, and Viagra commercials with young girl looking virile women talking about their virile men. It's the implicit underlying messages that aging is wrong or bad, but they're not explicitly saying it, and they probably don't even understand or aren't conscious that they are. So again, a lot of the explicit ageism that we see in society, things like discrimination in the workplace, cards and comics and all of those humorous things that we out front laugh about aging, tweets about people looking too old for things. But implicit is much more subtle and much more patronizing. So it's something embedded deep in our culture, and the actions and behaviors that we have aren't consciously driven. So we're not doing these on purpose. We're doing them from sort of a subconscious place. One really good example of this is elder speak. You've probably heard of that before, but elder speak, right, is very similar to baby speak. We tend to do things like raise the tone of our voice, slow down our words, talk too loudly, and talk in a patronizing way. So talking down to an older adult essentially is elder speak. So that is an implicit ageism thing. We're not really doing it because we think older adults are stupid or bad or horrible people, or it's a negative thing. We're doing this because of the sort of deep-seated ageist beliefs that we have in society. Our behaviors are just in accordance with those sort of underlying beliefs. Okay. And that's very similar to benevolent ageism, elder speak, right? So this is an example here in the graphic of benevolent ageism, which isn't mean-spirited, malevolent, you stupid, greedy, older adult you. This is very much our tendency to pity older adults and see them as pitiable and perhaps nice or warm and friendly, but incompetent. So they need our help. And oh, isn't that too bad? Benevolent prejudice has a sort of superficially positive sense to it. It's expressed in terms of apparently positive beliefs, but they tend to be patronizing in the way that they are said. So elder speak is one of them, thinking, oh, this must be a lonely old man. I feel so badly for him, and we have no idea what he's doing. He could be on his night off from his wife, hanging out and doing the things that he likes to do and eating a milkshake because she won't let him. So we tend, those patronizing thoughts and feelings and then motivated behaviors that we have, there are a lot of times benevolent ageism. We're not doing them from a place of meanness, but they still are ageism. Malevolent ageism, on the other hand, is overt, like in some ways like explicit, except it is mean-spirited. It's meant to be negative and mean. So one person who's done some research on malevolent ageism and how this is sort of manifested in society is Susan Fiske. So her and colleague North have done some studies on malevolent attitudes that are emerging more and more in our current society. So why are we getting more malevolently ageist than benevolently ageist? Part of the reason has to do with this baby boomer crunch, right? And some things that are outside our control, that are further outside our control as well, like the economic collapse in 2008 and people having to retire later and maybe not at all, and losing resources and having too many older adults for the amount of money we have. So there are three types of stereotypes that are behind this sort of malevolent ageism idea that she identified. And one of them is the greedy geezer. So this has to do with jobs and succession. So a lot of younger adults or middle adults see older adults as being greedy and taking their jobs as they're not retiring, because older adults tend to retire later and later lately due to, again, economic circumstances as well. So this is malevolent, and they see them as their fault, and it's their fault that they didn't get a job, and they have these malevolent attitudes towards them. And the second one is similar, and it's the acting entitled. So a lot of times we see this attitude towards people who are getting, Social Security and Medicare and all these social programs as you age. But again, younger adults who are getting stretched thinner and thinner in this economic time are viewing older adults as taking up too many resources, and why do they get all the resources? So that's another form of malevolent ageism that we have. And the last one is something we've probably all felt before, which is the act your own age, malevolent ageism. So a lot of cohorts that are coming through, like the baby boomers, right? As we talk about generations this week too, baby boomers are a lot different than their older cohorts above them. They're more socially active. They're more liberal often in their attitudes. They have a wide spectrum of beliefs and experiences, and they tend to have adapted positively in a lot of ways to how culture has become. So you see, older women still fashionable, and older men and women still fashionable, still active, still doing lots of things that we don't stereotypically think of as older. And that spurns some malevolent ageist ideas about why don't they just act their own age? Can't these older people just act old? So those are the three types that Fiske and North have found in their studies. And they find that over time, across their studies, that we are getting a little bit more and more malevolently ageist towards older adults who are conserving their own wealth, acting entitled, and acting too young. So this benevolent ageism that used to be predominant is getting supplanted a little bit by envy, contempt for these aging boomers here. So we're getting a little more scarcity of resources, which is spurring some of these. Okay. So there are also levels of ageism. So types, explicit, implicit, I forgot to mention an implicit. Implicit ageism is also measured by the survey that I had you do. So Implicit ageism is underlying, remember, so we're jumping back to this. And if you think about the results on this quiz, or the results that you will get when you take the implicit associations test, this picks up the more implicit ageism. So instead of asking you to raise your hand if you're ageist, we ask you to subconsciously do things that help us figure out if you have a preference towards young or old age. And don't feel bad if you get a preference towards young age. I got one too, and I'm a gerontologist, so we can't cure our own cultural ageism overnight, or in my case, in 10 years. You have to be purposeful about it all the time. Anyway, sorry about that. Okay, so in the levels of ageism, we have a macro level in society, and then we go down to institutional, down to interpersonal, and back down to embodied, which is internalized ageism for the individual. So we're going to talk about each of these. And they start at the macro, the highest level of society, and then go down to the micro level, the person. So in structural or cultural ageism, that's the highest level of ageism. And you'll see this a lot of times in media, right? So this is one way that we see structural cultural ageism, is we see it in things like The Simpsons and the tweet here that says I'm 42 going on dead, and there's this long list of tweets about aging that are hilarious that I found this on that are supposed to be hilarious, and all these jokes, that we have in society. So this is a good example of a structural or cultural level. It's at the highest level, or systematic ageism. The totalities of ways in which society fosters ageism. It's done through messages throughout our system, throughout our cultural beliefs, and lots of times, right, that means media for us. Now, one level down, still at the macro level, but one level down from structural, is institutionalized ageism. And these are some examples here of institutionalized ageism. So when you think about it, think about policies, the systems that we have in our society, like healthcare, and the institutions, right, that we have. You name it, prisons, schools, work, government, all of those things are institutions, and they all have ageism embedded in them. So we have things like workplace discrimination, and even though we have the Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967, we continue to have age-based discrimination in the workplace. And there are lots of examples of that. Housing policies that are ageist, that don't include older adults, or that exclude them from affordable housing. Healthcare policies that exclude older adults from affordable or accessible healthcare. And types of procedures, such as putting in a cap on hearing aids in England was an example that we have. So if you have mild hearing loss in England and you don't have moderate to severe hearing loss, you can't get hearing aids, because we've decided that that's an expendable cause. But you can bet that child health care rate gets the big bucks, because when we see people as older, we tend to think they're a little bit more expendable. Also, voting. So this is a good graphic here. We tend to be discriminatory towards older adults in our voting processes, because it's not easy. If you've ever tried to vote, some states, and registering to vote, particularly in primaries, getting there in the first place, and understanding voter ID laws. And some older adults haven't driven for a while, so they need to get IDs, and where do you get one? And do I need one? Those kinds of things can keep older adults away from voting. Okay. If we think again, one level down, we're at close to the micro level now, which is interpersonal. And this is Interpersonal is just what you think it is. It's from one person to another. It could be from one older adult to another, from a younger adult to an older adult, from a younger adult to a younger adult. But these are interactions, daily interactions that show ageism. So I give you the example here of when the new Star Wars movie came out, and there was a tweet storm about someone calling several people actually questioning why Carrie Fisher was in there, who was the original Leia, if you remember, and calling her, too old. Everybody was too old in this. Look at all the old characters. They were just ugly and slow and all of these things. Why can't we just have new ones? And Carrie Fisher, who is very articulate, and took on a lot of these people talking about how youth and beauty aren't accomplishments. They're temporary, and aging is normal and should be normal too. And then, of course, we see elder speak come back as benevolent ageism tool here with the interpersonal ageism. So, hi, sweetie, how are you doing today? Okay, we don't talk to each other that way normally. Why would we talk to an older adult that way? So those kinds of things are interpersonal ageism, is where we see interpersonal ageism come out. Then we get down to the absolute lowest level of the micro level of ageism, which is yourself, or embodied ageism. So what is embodied ageism? So stereotype embodiment theory explains embodied ageism, and this was coined by Becca Levy, who is at Yale, and she's been studying internalized ageism or embodied ageism for a couple of decades now, and several studies showing how different invoking age-based identifiers will then trigger those internalized stereotypes we have and affect our behavior, our subsequent behavior. So I'll give you an example of some of this. So we ask older adults to come in, and we say, well, we're going to give you a memory test. And on the top, we ask them, to identify their age, and potentially we say, are you an older adult? And they say yes. So that triggers thinking about aging, and it triggers that internalized ageist stereotype about older adults in memory. We actually find that older adults in general who are reminded that they're older before they do memory tasks do poorer. All things equal other than that. And that happens in health. It happens in cardiovascular reactivity. So we can induce self-fulfilling stereotypes in older adults just by sort of triggering them to think about their age, right? So we know that embodied ageism or internalized ageism is happening, which is all of those things that we get told over time and are reinforced by the cultural institutional structures become a part of us, probably subconsciously, but then they come out in the ways that we do things. So like if you were signing up for a race and you were, 65 years old and you're ready to go, you're trained, and they were like, oh, well, you're in the oldest category for age. Here you go. Chances are you'd probably do poorer than if they hadn't said anything, because it invokes these older adult stereotypes that, slower, physically declined, etc., and that monkeys with your brain, basically, and then your body acts accordingly to the stereotype. That's incredibly technical, monkeys with your brain. But if you're interested in looking at embodied ageism, which it's pretty fascinating, all of the things that we can do, including showing that inducing positive stereotypes about older adults helps them to shows that they even are healthier and may live longer. So this is pretty cool stuff, that stereotypes, or positive or negative stereotypes, the way we deal with ageism can affect our longevity even. So very interesting. And most of those studies are by Becca Levy and her colleagues at Yale, and a couple of other labs, like a couple in England. But I would look at Becca Levy's studies first. And these are just a couple of things. So research shows that negative stereotypes, if we induce them, decrease cognitive physical performance. They're associated with adverse cardiac events and fatalistic beliefs about health promotion, like, well, I don't need to exercise because I'm old. I'm just going to die anyway. And that's usually at a subconscious level. And then we can also see that the opposite, if we induce more positive stereotypes about older adults to the older adult, they recover more quickly from disability, they have better cognitive, physical, emotional outcomes, and they have a longer life. So this is really interesting stuff that the way that we believe affects so greatly the way that we behave in our lives. So what can we do now that we know, and we have known that ageism is there? What kinds of things can we do to either reverse or halt sort of ageism in our own lives or the lives of those around us? One important thing to do is always raise awareness and dispel myths. Those stereotypes are not true. Have a more realistic view of what aging actually is, which we try to do in seminar as well as intro, and as a gerontology secondary major, that's part of, your academic life. Can advocate and empower groups to do things. So advocating for older adults to have services, to have the exact same healthcare treatment as a younger adult would in a situation which we've seen doesn't happen. For example, older adults are less likely to get prescribed psychotherapy for depression than younger adults and are just given a pill right away. So there are things we can do as providers to advocate for older adults as well. Encourage intergenerational programs. So intergenerational programs have been shown to help reduce ageist beliefs in both the younger adults and the older adults themselves. So intergenerational programs are really key. Change the way you do things, be self-aware of the things that you show to others and laugh at, and the elder speak issues, and just in a sense be aware of your own biases that might be subconscious and some of those behaviors that might be coming out. And internalize positive stereotypes or positive images of aging, which are realistic, even just realistic and positive, not all negative, because we are all becoming older adults quickly, and that internalized ageism is going to affect us as well, and we need to be able to protect ourselves against that too. Okay, so that's my ageism lecture for the week. Like I said, there are a couple of follow-up research names that you can go to: Susan Fisk and North, for some stereotype and malevolent ageism. You can look at Becca Levy for implicit ageism and embodied ageism. And don't forget to take your implicit associations test for age and see where you fall. And kudos to you if you have a preference for older adults, because that is a difficult thing to do in that quiz. So